What was your final F you to a boss you didn't like? I was thinking about quitting but has holding back. I scheduled a vacation with 3 extra days. It was a once in a lifetime type of trip. He rejected my vacation request. I thought about it for a couple of hours. Went to his office and told him, I'm taking the trip no matter what. The next morning the boss met me at HR and gave me a formal written warning. I responded by giving him my 2-week notice. They apologized and tried to convince me not to leave but it was too late. Mechanic at a commuter airline. Boss wanted me to sign off a plane pre-flight inspection. I refused to sign because the plane was not airworthy. He told me if I wished to continue working, then I better sign. My response, then I guess I don't work here anymore. I picked up my toolbox and left. Edit. Yes, I am an A&P. I did report it to the head of maintenance as well as the FAA. No, I cannot reveal the airline. But rest assured, they have been absorbed by other major airlines several times and are not flying these model of planes any longer. I gave him a 2-hour notice when I quit. He had a habit of firing people on the spot when they gave advance notice. Wait, but isn't it more favorable to you if you are fired so you can qualify for unemployment benefits? Assuming you are in the US, if you resign, you don't qualify. If you were fired for cause you don't get unemployment. Also if you give notice you have already quit. The job is simply telling you that we don't want you to wait that long. I was a program director developing and piloting a new program. And after a year of being overloaded and telling our exec director I either needed a second person or a smaller caseload, he pulls me into his office and goes, we don't really think you're a good fit for this position, but you're a bright young lady and we'd hate to lose you. I'm giving you the option to stay and be my secretary. You have until 7 AM tomorrow to decide. I took an early lunch, walked to my other job, asked if I could take on more hours, walked back, and told him I had found other employment and would have my stuff cleared out by noon. He asked if I could stay 2 more weeks to train a new person, and I told him no. What if we paid you a consultation fee? No, but you're the only person in the county certified. Should have thought of that earlier. Bonus. This was in the middle of an audit, where it was discovered that he owed me about $3,000 from unpaid hours. I like to call it my leaving bonus. We don't think you are a good fit for this position. I am literally the only person in the county that fits this position. Some people, man. My boss and I had butted heads a few times after she took over the office. After finding a much better job I handed her a list of my job responsibilities, which she asked for, because she didn't understand what I did there. This is too much. We'd have to distribute all this to like 4 different people, and I said yay and walked out. Spoiler, she didn't do any of that and was fired less than a year later as the office was falling apart. That shit always pissed me off. I had a manager basically the same way. I was doing the work of 3+ people. I constantly said we needed relief. Juniors even to take the easier loads off or something. Nothing. Then I found I was being paid less than new hires with no experience after multiple years of this shit. So, one day, I got an offer for almost double my salary. Basically going from $65K to $130K. We can't match that. So I left and chaos unfolded. They didn't realize I was playing the linchpin, because about 6 months later I found out the team basically collapsed. My colleagues said F it and left from the extra work without help. They offshored the department who made it worse and they let them go and brought it back on shore, with people entirely untrained and no knowledge on our job, which also had to balance against federal laws while doing it. Then there were layoffs and they were targeted because now it's a cost center instead of a previous profit center. And my previous manager, removed from the role and relegated to being basically a ticket jockey with absolutely no responsibilities. Senior leadership asked me to come back with 20% on top of the new salary to run things. That's a negative ghost rider. You need to truly learn from this and me coming back isn't going to teach that lesson. I worked hard over the course of a year to get all my former co-workers I cared about new jobs. Same. We were all fired en masse. I knew it was coming. So I formed my LLC. I had my work lined up, called every other person who was let go, and offered to find them work. Old boss called me up and threatened to sue me for going after their ex-employees. F you Darren. Best thing ever. Did someone tape a fish behind his desk? Applied for a full-time job at a daycare. Interview was on Friday and the director said she would text me over the weekend to tell me my hours for next week. Yay. I got the job. Monday rolls around and no text or email from her. So I am sitting in my PJs at home thinking I'm out of work. At 10 AM a random number calls me and she asks me to come in for 11. I let it slide thinking she lost track of time or whatever. By the end of the day I asked for my schedule and she said she'll contact me tomorrow morning at 9 AM. The next day is the same thing, except this time she calls at 11 AM asking to come in for 11:15. I waited 2 hours for her call. Now I have no car and live 15 minutes away. On top of this the shifts were only 4ish hours long, so the job isn't even full time. I tell her I need a schedule by the end of the day. Didn't get one. The next day she calls at a random time but too late. I'm busy at an interview with a different job. I tell her I'll stop in to get my check by the end of the week, because she can't respect my time and lied on the ad about being full time. Also I am not getting paid to be on call. Working retail. I quit at the register on Black Friday. I had recently gotten another full-time job and was keeping this retail gig because I liked the employee discounts, and due to my other job this check was pure fun money. All that is to say, I didn't need the retail job. My store manager comes over at hour 7 of my shift with chaos and a line 100 people long and has the nerve to tell me my upsells, fishing for promo sign-ups, that is rewards, credit cards etc. when cutting it for how much traffic I was seeing in front of the customers. I already couldn't stand this B. So I said, you know what, you do it. I'm done, and then I apologized to my co-workers on the way out. I worked a register job at a bulk store for a while, and they had the same issue with me. I hated giving that dumb little spiel to each person in line. It felt scummy to me, and I didn't like that. I felt like I was forcing something onto the customer that they didn't want. I even got yelled at by customers for it a couple times. When I left, he promised to take half what I was making and spread it among the team as raises to cover the extra work. He was trying to stop the exodus as I was the third person to leave in a short time. So when I left I handed my pay stub, minus social security info, to the team and said, just in case he tried to lie, this is what I make. He tried to lie. They also realized they were being underpaid by a good chunk. He told me that was a breach of confidential information and they could sue me. I told him to sue me then. Never heard from that company again except for tax docs. For those unfamiliar, in the US you are legally allowed to disclose your own pay, and it's illegal for your employer to tell you that you can't. I'm assuming if he did try that, HR or the lawyers quickly corrected him before they had to hand me a settlement. Edit. Some people misunderstand. Just because it's legal to share your salary doesn't mean your employer can prohibit it by policy. In the US, it is expressly illegal for your employer to do that. Salary was delayed by 2 weeks and was about told to be lenient because the company is growing and needs our help and cooperation. I waited for another week but I was ignored. I left the job without notice, and upon them calling me to sue me, I replied, you have money to sue people but no money to pay employees. I switched job and I am at a better place right now. Missing payroll is a serious offense. My current job actually missed my first paycheck. I was set to start on a Monday, but the lead was set to go on vacation Sunday, so they had me come in on Saturday instead to train with him. Well, my manager forgot to tell admin payroll that I'm starting earlier than planned. Payday rolls around and nothing. They realized what happened and added those hours to my next paycheck, which was a full 8 hours of overtime pay. Not bad for my first check. On my last day at the bowling alley, I sent an email to head office detailing all the shit he'd been up to, but everyone was too afraid to report, including trying to fire someone when he found out she was pregnant. A big no-no in my country. I heard later that the next day regional manager and a couple of executives turned up for a surprise inspection. He's found in the office, having backed a 16-year-old female colleague in the corner, screaming at the top of his lungs, with his big red vein-throbbing face touching hers. She was distraught and obviously crying her eyes out. Manager was escorted off premises there and then, and never heard from again. I quit. They begged, so I agreed to stay while they hired someone for me to train up. I figured it might be a month or two. The local talent pool was not a deep one. Months pass, no interviewees, and I asked co-workers if they'd seen people being interviewed for my spot, and it turns out no one was being interviewed for it. I don't know what possessed management to disregard the gift I had offered, but long story short, I quit that Friday with no further warning, sent the email at end of day, and I guarantee that ruined several people's weekends. Probably right up to the CIO level, since he was the one who convinced me to stay on, while they hired a replacement. Scroll forward a year, and they had hired 3 people to try to keep up with the workload I was managing. Was still falling behind with lower quality work. Various departments were pissed at management, and the co-workers I knew from the place had been told by management to ask me if I'd come back if they ran into me in town. A few folks did run into me, obviously, which is how I found all that out. We had a good laugh. Edit. Wow, this blew up lol. I've mentioned this story before on Reddit. I think I should farm it for karma every few years. But seriously, F that company. Headaches going into the office every day. Endless stress no appreciation right up. Until I told them I was walking. Folks, if you ever have a job and do it well, the only appreciation that matters is your pay. Them giving you endless kudos is just the HR version of likes and prayers, and doesn't even show up on your LinkedIn. My co-worker bought cake and ice cream for the office. Someone asked what we were celebrating, and he said his last day. I forgot my name tag at my second or third day at work at a supermarket. The manager, Damien, asks me where the name tag was, and I was honest. I forgot it. He says to me, "How about I forget to pay you?" I wanted to tell him off but needed the job. It was casual hours, but they started giving me more and more when they saw how efficient I was. I had a few run-ins with the guy over a couple months. He was one of those short guys that had a complex about it. Drove a powerful car, belittled people, and was just a piece of shit. Eventually I found full-time work. So one day I walk in, resigned on the spot and walked out. But it was a weekend and he wasn't there. It was right before Christmas. For some reason that night I get a call from the store, asking me to come in to cover a shift the next morning, and I mentioned I had quit. They had no one else to do it and said why not one last shift. I said no and hung up. About 5 minutes later I got a call from Damien asking me to do the coverage. I repeated to him that I had quit, and he repeated that he needed the coverage and he'd see me in the morning. I said, "F you," and hung up. He called me back and said that I can't say that and HR will be having a word with me. So I said F off shortus and blocked his number. Thankfully the new job worked out and I never needed that Damien idiot for a reference. Worked in China in a language training center. Left the country without informing anyone at work. Once I was out of China, I posted all the info I had about the benefits foreign workers were supposed to have, but never had. Tax reimbursement, pension savings, etc. And how HR and finance appropriated them in regional and local WeChat groups both in English and Chinese. Also posted addresses of local government offices where foreign workers could inquire about the aforementioned benefits or complain about lack thereof. A guy I used to work with spent a stint in China teaching English. When he tried to leave, his employers implied they would report him to the communist government as some kind of spy. He waited until his next paycheck, bought a plane ticket with cash and ran. Not sure if I believe his story, but I've seen stranger things. Well, I mean, it was an actual FU. He had just realized he was getting terminated for some pretty egregious safety related ignorance that I and several others had reported. He was going through that sob story period while HR was investigating, and came in for his shift one day and HR had accidentally terminated him early, which he found out trying to use our work portal, and his logins didn't work for anything. So while he's sob storying me, he was unaware of who had reported him. I basically go, "So this is your last day? Yeah man. I'm terminated in the system. Whoa, that sucks for you. I just want to take this opportunity to tell you, F you and F you for endangering our safety here. You were, by far, the worst manager I have ever seen." And then I just walked away. I taped a piece of fish to the back of his desk which was up against a wall. I heard later on that it wasn't found for almost a month. F you Darren. Always take 2 pieces of fish, so that when he finds the first one he is relieved and will stop looking. That's where the fun kicks in. 4 will be better. When he found the first 3, he will think that's the maximum number of pieces one can do to annoy him. But when he found the 4th one, he will get anxious and thinks there will be more. Lost him a big deal with another company by walking away at a critical moment. In fact, I walked right to the arcade across the street. Haha. How did he respond to that? He called a lot, and when I answered, he was for the first trying to talk with respect. That's how I know I really FM. I'm a commercial construction superintendent. I couldn't get the support needed from our PMs and had been thrown under the bus for several deficiencies that I had pointed out early in the project, all of which were ignored. My 30 years of experience meant nothing against their 3-5 years in the industry. I was tasked with developing a safety program that was never enforced or followed. As well, 3 sites were nailed by OSHA. I got the blame for that as well. One evening, on a whim, I restored my laptop, tablet, and phone to factory settings. The next morning I removed all of my belongings from the site trailer. I then locked it up, sent them a goodbye and F you very much message, and tossed the keys into a retention pond. I got a call 4 hours later from the company I now work for, and 8 days later I had moved to a new state for twice the salary and a lot less stress. I've been on that path lately. They haven't attempted to throw me under the bus, but I get 0 support from our PMs. 10 out of 10 questions go unanswered. I'm stuck in numerous endless meetings where I need to know everything and must have a ready answer for all of their ridiculous questions. But if I have a question, the answer is always, well, get back to you. I'm currently covering the workload of 2 and getting paid for less than 1. Demanded a raise and got, we just need you to work a little harder. About 6 projects will fall if I leave. They don't have the manpower to cover it. I've been sending out my resume this week. My mom was in the final stages of cancer and wanted to be around my parents as much as possible. Tried to ask for leave by FMLA, and the sheriff and chief basically said, that's life, and declined the leave plan. I quit and found another job and was able to have a good final 6 months with her before she passed. I walked into his office before my shift started, told him, I quit. He says, you're giving your 2 weeks notice? I said, looking at my watch, I'm giving my 10 minutes notice. The 2 weeks thing isn't required, it's a courtesy. Yep, if I can be fired at will by a company, I can fire the company at will too. Of course, if I'm leaving on good terms I'll give a notice, but I've had to leave a job before without one. Interviewed for a new job and was offered it. I wrote my 2-week notice that same day and handed it over the next morning. I worked 11 PM 7 AM. The complete waste of oxygen. That was the GM at the time. Tried to compete with the new job, and I laughed in his face. Told him that in order for me to even consider staying, he would have to give me a $9 HR raise, PTO, and health insurance. He made a hateful comment, and I took my notice and changed the final date of the current date, and told him to have fun working 7 nights a week. The new job was a lateral move, same exact job, same hours, just a better company, and is still my current job. I've had 12 raises, just celebrated 10 years there, with management having food delivered for me every night for a week. Worked at a stupid fake French cafe, and the manager was an idiot who made a point of giving me the shittiest jobs, just to show he was in charge. One day he pulled me off the floor, where I earned tips as a server, and made me polish silver for hours. He kept returning and throwing every second piece back at me, telling me to do it over. Kept saying, Mr. Spot. So I walked out and kept the apron. I kept the beautiful black apron with the embroidered logo and still wear it when I cook today. Also invoiced the owner for my outstanding pay and informed him his manager was not up for the job. Owner begged me to reconsider, but I told him nope. Keeping the apron is just moi chef's kiss. Perfect. She was a psychopathic narcissist. I knew she was plotting to leave her husband because I found it on a numbered to-do list on top of her desk. I was floored that she would leave it where her husband could see. It was a home office in one large room. I took a photo. She proceeded to harass and gaslight her husband, who took off one night and slept in a parking lot. When he returned the next day she said, You left me, so it's over. After she royally screwed me over for the umpteenth time, I quit. A few weeks later I sent the photo to her husband, copied her, and wrote, "For your records," in the subject line. Then I reported her to the IRS. Had a boss that was terrible to me. Him and his wife owned a restaurant together, and one day when he was yelling at me while I was getting the bar ready, I saw him put in his password on his phone. It was space, period, space. We all know something was going on with him with another employee. Months later he wouldn't give me 3 days off because my niece died of SIDS. So I walked out, bought a $30 burner phone and texted his wife his password. They got divorced. She kept the steakhouse. And he's had 2 failed attempts at opening any establishment. I make more than him now and he lives in the crappy apartments down the road from me. My boss's boss hated me. He drove out my previous boss. That was one of the best managers I ever worked for. He demoted me. And then when the company laid off everyone else who knew my product, I insisted he restore me to my previous status or I'd quit. He did, and he wasn't happy about it. Eventually he demoted me again and I found another job. During my exit interview with HR, I spoke at length about how he'd F up the department and fired many excellent people who were now working for the competition. A few months later he was escorted to the door and told never to return. Apparently the company took a good, long look at him and found he'd been holding his meetings with his subordinate managers in a local bar and would sometimes never return to the office. I don't know whether my discussions with HR had anything to do with their review of his performance, but I'd like to think so. I said, "F this," and hung up on him. After him yelling at me over the phone and saying demeaning crap, I didn't return to work. He sees me around sometimes and initially tried to pretend like nothing happened, but quickly realized that I pretend he doesn't exist. The manager told me the company I worked for owned me and that I'd do what they said or face consequences. This was in a meeting with other employees present. I walked out of the store with the manager screaming at me to get back to work. Was in line for a promotion after my old supervisor was fired for ethics issues. Boss decided to open the requisition, interview and hire a personal in the 2 days I had off. Since the person hired had no experience in my department field, I was expected to train my new supervisor and the other new people they also hired. I did none of that. Quit, gave my 2 weeks, and didn't explain a single thing to anyone in those 10 days. Supposedly it took almost half a year to get close to where they were before this all went down. As far as my life goes, it was the shittiest job I ever took. Long hours, a lot of crunch, no company vehicle and a lot of travel. Every time I'd go to a different site, I would get like 20 different phone numbers for the various people I was communicating with. Anyway, so all of the contacts for these people was on my company phone that was synced up to my personal Gmail, which stored all the phone numbers. At some point management decided my job was redundant and decided to lay me off without notice and without severance. First thing I did was wipe my company phone clean before handing it over. A few days later they called me asking where all the contact information was stored. Sorry, I don't work for you anymore. I had a shitty fast food job making like $8 an hour in high school, and the new manager that the corporate owner brought in acted as if he was God himself. Nothing was ever good enough. Nobody could meet his standard. He could do no wrong. If you were on his good side you would be spared and he'd overlook your laziness. Dude was a low-key perv, letting the young high school girls come in late and leave early in exchange for hugs, and would always give them breaks. My final straw was when he literally stormed at me and called me into his office one day. "Why were you just standing around instead of working?" I was waiting for the fries to finish and it had maybe 30 seconds left on the timer. "You use that time to restock 30 seconds? Like yeah, lemme just pull a Superman and restock the whole kitchen in 30 seconds. I told him I was going to college in the fall and couldn't work between the hours of 10 AM to 2 PM. I must have told him like 3 or 4 times. The next week's schedule came out. Monday through Friday 9 to 5. I was like, "I specially told you I'd be unavailable during those hours." He gorilla ripped the schedule off the wall and reposted the new one. I went from having a full schedule to 6 to 10 AM on Sunday. When the day finally came, I never showed up. I got a call from him at 4 PM acting almighty. F that guy. I told him I quit, and he was like, you cannot use me a reference. I once worked at a gas station convenience store that would stay pretty busy for a smallish town right off a major highway overnight, and I worked the night shift. The manager who hired me was great and I enjoyed working for her. Then she left for better things, and suddenly there was this pure nugget of a manager who was just a bitter, racist old hag. She and I were basically instant enemies. One night I was 6 minutes late. I was very, very rarely late, and her little F buddy, I guess, called her to tattle on me after I relieved him, and then she called the store and started going off on me. Since I worked alone overnight until 7 AM, I waited for about an hour after the berating phone call, and for a moment when the store was empty. Then I hit the emergency stop for the pumps, locked the front doors, counted my drawer very slowly and carefully for the cameras so they couldn't accuse me of stealing, left a note saying, I quit, in the drawer, and closed the register back up. Then I got on the store phone and called the district manager, and left a voicemail, explaining exactly why I quit, and the effery the manager was up to. Then L went to the breakers, shut off the outside lights and most of the inside ones, to make the place look closed, and I left out the side door, which would lock behind me, got in my car and left. It's likely, my quitting this way, cost the store about $1,500 to $2,000 in sales that night. This was my senior year of high school. I worked at IHOP and my direct supervisor was leaving, so the GM was going to take over my schedule. Well, he didn't like me, or my two friends who worked there as well, so when he posted the new schedule and drastically cut our hours, all three of us walked out and quit. He still had to fill like 4 or 5 weekday shifts and cover all of our weekend hours, because all of us worked both Sat and Sun morning rush. Oh, I have a great one for this. 2.5 years ago, my company decided to dock my bonus by 50% because of the pandemic. I was the only one in a sales team of 40 that achieved his target. Didn't say a word to anyone, just filled out an exit form on the HRM software and mentioned the reason as, company stole my money while the CEO bought a brand new car. My manager calls me being the a-hole that he thought he was, and I told him, very calmly, Shri, you're just their guard dog. I don't talk to dogs. The CEO calls me, small firm, just 50 odd people, and starts to tell me how his personal life has nothing to do with my docked bonus. Told him he can go ride that car into a canyon, for all I care. An hour later he calls me from another number since I wasn't picking up his calls. On the other end was a co-worker in conference telling me how great the CEO was, how he gave him an advance on his payment when he needed it. This was followed by 2 minutes of me and my GF laughing loudly on the call and talking about how this was so pathetic, as if I'm a girl who has broken up with him and he calls with his friend to tell me how he's the best guy ever. It finally ended with the CEO speaking up and revealing that he was also on the call and could hear us, and my last words were, "Oh, that's great. I was worried you wouldn't realize what a bee you were being." Never dealt with them again. Started my own business, making my monthly salary in about a week.